Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Thank you for joining us. Out of all the places that you could have gone on the internet to spend your time and energy, you decided to chill with us and stick it out with us, and we really, really appreciate that. So today we have a great episode coming up with someone who we are really honored to have on our show, and she always encourages people to go out and touch some grass. And so I can't think of a better place than today's sponsor, Cabin on the Coulee Farm, to go out and touch some grass.
Cabin on the Coulee Farm is actually rated #1 farm stay in Canada. That's really good advice. We take it now on an annual basis, and we stay here to get our touching of grass. And it's also a great place to disseminate podcasts like this, the one coming up, because it's very dense and there's only one way to actually remember podcasts like this, and that's to give it necessary distance. And what better distance can you get than in Buck Nowhere in central Alberta? So you can go to cotc.ca, Cabin on the Coulee Farm.
Yeah, and on the website, you can check out all of these beautiful glam sites, starting with the cabin. There's pictures online for those of you listening. It's a great place to stay. It holds 6 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 4 beds, pet friendly, and then the Coulee Yurt. Guys, the owners of these glam sites have put in so much care and work into making them beautiful for y'all. So please go check it out. Holds 5 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 3 beds. Not pet friendly, but the Grouse House is the third option. It is pet friendly. It can hold 4 guests, 1 bedroom, and 2 beds. So make sure to go on the website to book if you guys are interested. And if you want to know more about how you can support these local family businesses, because that's really important to our hearts and actually important to the heart of our guest as well, who is going to be hopping on in a couple seconds here, then go to Cabin on the Coulee's Substack to get videos, updates, pictures on the ins and outs and operations of what's going on.
Yeah, and if you enjoy this episode and the guests that we get on, please feel free to help me and Macy fuel our brains by buying us a matcha to say thank you.
Yeah, and we are really excited to fuel your brain and mainly have our guests fuel your brain. So without further ado, let's get on with the episode.
Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Now, this is a brand new segment, and it's going to be a very, very crucial one, specifically for Albertans to get in their brain. We don't really have a title for it, but it's regarding the aspects of, with Alberta trying to aim to be a new nation and this movement, everybody thinking about, as Macy, you like to say, it's the best thought experiment. What does it take to run a country? What are the cons, threats? What are the structures and infrastructure? All the things we have to think about that could help us not continue the mistakes that people believe Canada's currently been making or other countries have made. How can we learn from countries that are already doing a good job? But for this segment, we have people like Tom Luongo coming, Alex Craner. We will get Matthew Arrett, because these are all brains that understand the geopolitical aspects. But ladies first, of course.
Nice. That was good.
Sweet.
And
Sweet.
for our first guest, we have Colonel Towner Watkins. The reason we wanted to get her on is because in regards to looking at geopolitics, she knows Operation Gladio. Now, you may have heard me and Macy on our previous Home Squared segment allude to this. It is something that me and Macy have actually been throwing out just to see if, other young people or other Albertans have heard of it, so they can consider it as Alberta tries to move in this new direction. And they haven't. And that's a problem because it is happening on a regular basis across the globe. And it is very easy for good-intentioned Albertans, grassroots movements like ours to be subverted by mechanisms such as Operation Gladio. And so Colonel Towner Watkins, being our dubbed expert in this, is going to explain to us what it is. And then as Albertans, how can we keep an eye for it, recognize the patterns? She always talks about pattern recognition, and that's something I think that Albertans really need to keep their head on a swivel. And it's an honor for us because she is between Badlands and then the Tommy podcast. She's there. And so we're very honored for her to take the time and do this with us. Dad, is there any other extra context that you would like to add before?
So one of the things about what we do just as a family is that we've had our story very honestly looked at. Like, we're not shying away from anything, including changing our axioms. One of the things that ends up happening as you move along, you think you understand where you are on the map. And if there's anybody that understands just even my own family's story as this come along ever since the COVID debacle starting in March 15th, 2020, I had to apologize to my family because, sort of like feeling like the strong guy at the door, and nobody gets to your family except, through me, so to speak. But things transpired and unraveled, and I found that, for a fellow that thought he was pretty savvy, I wasn't. And so I had to be accountable to my family and eat a real big humble pie and go, I don't know where we are. I had to change the mapping. And Colonel Towner is, Watkins is one of the minds that helped that process for me, amongst others. I had said to the girls prior to the show, I was like, this is like, I feel like the family that's going to one of the Magnificent Seven as a gunslinger to come and help us save our town. And so that's one of the reasons why you're here. And it is an absolute honor to have you. I've been following you ever since you were reading Cynthia's book, just because I do want to plug it. It's
The Empire on which the Black Sun never set.
among others.
That is one of the first books that I did too, so kudos to you. That you have been on this journey with me, and I mean, my story echoes your story. When I first started doing this, I had no idea where it was gonna lead, and I've had to reprogram my entire brain and life, as a result of this evolutionary process of research, the truth, and not the stories we've been told.
Mm. Yeah, for people that don't, there's a reason we called her Colonel Towner. She was in the military, and thus she, if people remember our interview with Morgan, who used to be a NDP advocate, he helped the party and all that jazz. He came out of it, so he has a really good lens as to which to look and understand the beast of the politic game. Well, Colonel Towner, being in the military, has seen even before and after, because she didn't know this, just like most of us with COVID. We didn't know. We were just going through the motions. And then suddenly you put on, as she calls it, her gladio glasses. As soon as she learned this knowledge, her whole experience with the military, she started looking and recalling conversations that she didn't understand necessarily at the beginning. And then pieces started falling into place. And her understanding now, gladio, she has a better lens of looking at who the enemy is. Being in the military, this is something that I definitely want you to talk about, Colonel, is I feel like in the military, and this is definitely portrayed in all the Hollywood shows and all that, they give you your enemy because they, the soldiers, and you need to have something to fight for. You need the target to be clear and concise.
ADS.
Yeah, and in Alberta, and with a lot of gladio-like operations, even all of Canada, for that matter, is being given their enemy. And through your lens, we're going to discover who you thought the enemy was, who they gave you your enemy to be, and then who you find it to be now, comparatively. So the change of axiom that you had to go through, because I have a feeling that a lot of Canadians and Albertans are going to have to go through the same axiom, because I think we all know who the enemy is, don't we? And who's actually infiltrating Alberta. And I have a feeling that it's not going to be the case with your expertise and shedding light on that. So we want to walk people through this process because changing axioms is hard, but everybody has to do it. So this is just a way for you to share your personal experience because you are the epitome of having to change your axioms.
So let me just kind of walk everybody through. So I did spend 30 years in the Air Force. I lived all over. I traveled all over. Had a wide array of jobs. I started off enlisted in aircraft maintenance. I became an officer. I did personnel work, and then eventually you get into command, and you're a commander of ever increasing amounts of personnel. As a result of that, as you articulated, you're given an enemy. When I first came in, of course, it was the Soviet Union. I came in 1979. Literally everything that we did was focused on that enemy. And you notice around 1990, 91, the collapse of the Soviet Union, we immediately had in the closet another boogeyman. And that was going to be radical Islamic terrorist. And that exploded, after Iraq. And then supposedly it was because we were in Iraq, they just hate us and all of this other stuff. Well, to your point of this given boogeyman or enemy in the military, and literally all of the intelligence is catered to given to the military to go after those adversaries by our Central Intelligence Agency, in nice little packets of intelligence that you find out after the fact, sometimes decades later, wasn't actual intelligence at all. It was completely made up. And so then you're left with the real enemy being your government, not some foreign adversary, your actual government, who wants to take all of your wealth and transfer it to this oligarch entity. And the way they do it is through foreign engagement in the United States. And so when I first read Anthony Sutton's trilogy about the creation of the Bolshevik Revolution, origins going back to Wall Street and the City of London, and the funding of Hitler's machine going back to Wall Street and the City of London, and FDR's whole career being founded at Wall Street and the City of London, that kind of changed my entire look. I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't learn any of this. I didn't learn that Trotsky had hung out in New York City and was basically put up there for his entry back into Russia, and that Lenin was put up as the counterpart in London and ferried back into the Russia in the aftermath. So that kind of, so you talk about the axis of your world, that kind of moved it a little bit. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. And I've always been a reader. I have like 600 books, not including the 150 that I bought since I found Gladio. So I had a fairly good grasp. I mean, I have 6 different degrees, and every degree that you have to take history and all of this other stuff. And so I had data points, but I didn't have anywhere to put all of the information. And for me, when I read Anthony Sutton's book, it kind of, like I said, shifted my whole paradigm a little bit. And so I started digging into it. And I found a couple of books that talked about how there's this entity up here, which I refer to as the International Syndicate, that basically creates the good guys and the bad guys in all of these scenarios. And they're literally creating them. And the reason they do that is they label this the strategy of tension. So if I can pit these guys that line up behind this, but I'm still controlling them, and I can put people in this camp, still controlling them, and I can radicalize these, the people that won't get in either one of those camps get pushed into what's referred to as the third way. And all of them collectively create all of this chaos, so that these people up here can control all of us. And they just use these fringe elements to do it. And you can see that playing out today. They're controlling the left and the right, whether it's outright or through infiltration. And they get them fighting with each other. And the rest of us are all sitting here going, what is happening? And the radicalized elements of this are agents, witting or unwitting, in an effort to push us all onto the same cattle car to create this one world government entity. And that stuff started getting fleshed out. So now my axiom, my kind of equator or
Center of gravity.
center of
Axis,
gravity
yeah.
shifted a little bit more. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If the Soviet Union wasn't really our enemy and we created it, this entity created it, then what the heck? And so then I found Cynthia's book that you just mentioned, and she takes it back in that book to the Fabian Society and all of their rhetoric using the term one world government in the 1800s. And I was just blown away. And she then funnels that down through the Royal International Affairs, the RIIA, and its counterpart, the CFR. I found since then the Pilgrim Society,
Yep.
which predates that 10 years almost to the day. founding something in London as well as New York. And so you just start seeing this kind of flesh out into this entire apparatus. And then, so in my way of thinking, we have this international oligarch, and they create a para-political, a para-economic, and a paramilitary capability to rule the world. The para-political piece of it is these fake parties. These parties aren't real.
Yeah.
There's no two parties in the United States. They control the politics, and the CIA's history is full of them infiltrating every political movement around the world to ensure that the person in charge of a country is under their control, the international syndicate. And if the people stand up like we did with Donald Trump and elect someone outside of their control, they just try to get rid of them repeatedly, sometimes killing them repeatedly. And repeatedly. So that's the parapolitical piece of it. The paraeconomic piece was completely put in place post World War II. But of course, the precursor to that was the Bank of International Settlements after World War I, because you have to have major dysfunction in order to implement these huge, big changes internationally. So World War I, Bank of International Settlements, and a new map. And World War II gave us the IMF, the World Bank, and another new map. And so when you're talking about geography, as you guys are talking about with Alberta, these maps that were drawn are drawn artificially, especially internationally.
Like
You know,
Sykes-Picot, right? The Sykes-Picot. Yeah, okay.
yes. So you take the Middle East, which of course is a hotspot, and all of those countries over there are basically fake countries. They're not real countries. They're not culturally cohesive. Those lines were drawn on purpose to ensure just what I illustrated, chaos, so they can control them. You put ethnically different people inside of a fake country, and you're going to be able to agitate them through infiltration anytime you need to create a war. And you can just see this repeated around the world. As a matter of fact, a great example of that is Colombia and Panama. When prior to World War One, this was very early on, the Sullivan and Cromwell that gave us John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles and all of these nefarious people had decided, they had a customer, a client that was in France, and they owned the property where the Panama Canal is. And we as a country in the United States had decided we're going to build a Nicaraguan canal. It was actually cheaper. It was going to be done faster. And it had already passed law. They had started building it. They had put the port in, I believe on the Pacific side first. And Sullivan and Cromwell goes to their favorite legislatures that they owned and said, we really don't want to do this. We've got this client over here that's building the Panama Canal, and they're going broke. Now, keep in mind, France used African slave labor to build 40% of the Panama Canal, and the company still went broke. So they wanted some money for that. They basically wanted to be bailed out. And so the deal was, well, we've got to get Panama away from Colombia because it was all one country, Colombia demanded payment and in order for this to happen. So instead of paying Colombia to do this, we just decided to create a new country called Panama. Panama was not even a country before that. And so we just go in and fake a coup, took over that area, prompted or installed our puppet there, and planted a flag in the United States State Department, president. Everybody says, oh, look, all of a sudden, we've got this new country. So the same people that are telling you you can't establish a new country have done it all over the world.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
for their purposes.
Exactly. Anytime it is of their interest to do that, they will do it. You mentioned the Congo, I think when we were talking earlier. Another great example, when the Belgium gave the Congo their freedom in the late 50s, early 1960s timeframe, and they decided they wanted Patrice Lumumba to be their new prime minister. Belgium was not okay with that. They didn't like him because he was a nationalist. So they were the largest supply of uranium at the time, and most of their resources in the Congo was located in this very small area called Katanga. And they did exactly the same thing. They go set up a big military installation there. It involved all of NATO at the time, and they fielded an army there, and they created a civil war. It was all fake. And they immediately said, Katanga is separating from the Congo. We want our independence. And everybody all of a sudden recognizes them as their own country. They're not their own country. And that completely destabilized the Congo because that's the money that Patrice
That
Lumumba
was
was
their
going.
resources.
Yeah, for the
Yes.
French's, the uranium was what was they were using for their power plants and whatnot
And
too,
it
right? All
wasn't just
throughout
uranium.
Europe.
Yeah, they had uranium, they had diamonds, they had gold, they had all kinds of resources in that area. And that's a big deal for Alberta because Alberta is the resource capital of Canada.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, between
if
us
you
and Lower
don't,
Saskatchewan, Colonel, because Saskatchewan also has large amounts of.
yes,
Yes,
but if
okay,
you
you know.
if you guys don't understand the history of the countries that have had this done to them, you're not going to understand how to do it for yourselves because any effort to detach yourself from mainland Canada with the amount of resources you have is going to be targeted for infiltration, and because it would be a huge big deal. And what they're most afraid of is that you're successful.
Mm.
Because
Oh
what
yeah.
happens when you're successful and you don't have a port? The people that are next door to you to the west is going to be going, wow, look at all of those people. They're thriving under their own government. They're thriving under their own use of resources for the indigenous people. And they're going to go, oh, I want to join them. Or to your point, the Saskatchewan is going to go, hey, we could do that too. Let's join Alberta. And then all of a sudden, because look at what happened, and you were mentioning before we went on the air about the United States. The experiment of us leaving the UK, we did not have the entire United States, right? So little by little, because there were it was broken up. And little by little, through purchase or whatever, the country continued to grow. But immediately there was an infiltration through the CFR, the Pilgrim Society, and I mean it goes back to the early 1800s, with the first central bank and all of these other things that kept coming up, that they kept trying to attack us, not overtly because they couldn't, but through some very nefarious infiltration. And that's emblematic of all of this type of activity. If you don't understand history and go back and look through who was successful in doing it, who was not successful in doing it, and you have to delineate the the times where intelligence agencies are the ones that created the new country versus the indigenous people. There's very big distinctions in pattern recognition of what's happening around the world when these things happen. And just understand that the more entities within, for example, like the breaking up of Yugoslavia, it was very advantageous to break that up to control the smaller elements of it. And that's something that you always have to be on guard about.
Now, I have a clarifying question because one thing that you said in another podcast I was listening to, I know I've been listening to so many, so I don't know if it was one with Tommy or with somebody else, but you had made the distinction, because here in Alberta, when people think, there have been some people considering the threat of foreign infiltration, but they've said that the foreign infiltration is coming from the United States, from Trump. Now, how come you haven't said Trump? Is there, you've been specifying intelligence agencies, is there a distinction between the intelligence agencies versus the U.S. government?
100%. So let me give you my model. So I told you about the international syndicate, and I told you about the political, economic, and the paramilitary. This element here is controlled by the intelligence agencies. So notice there's no national governments in between them. It is an international syndicate and intelligence agencies. The intelligence agencies do not work for the governments where they're housed. They never have. And I think it's going to require all of them to go away before you're ever able to have a semblance of a cohesive government, because they've never, ever worked for the government, ever.
Mm.
Yeah, even
So
our RCMP actually swear an oath to the crown more than they do to the
yes,
citizens. And not to mention that the RCMP that got caught red-handed for the FLQ Operation Gladio that happened in Quebec under Pierre Trudeau and the Fabian Society there, they ended up having to, because they had their hand caught in the cookie jar, they just rebranded and became CSIS.
that's what they do every single time. They just change their name. The constituted entity never changes. As a matter of fact, that's what you find in Iran right now. The Savak that was set up after the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953 was created by MI6 and the CIA. And eventually Mossad joins them in training programs. But the Savak just changed its name in the 1979 revolution. It did not disband. And it still had affiliations with all of these people through intelligence ties. So it's so important to understand. So going back to our model, if you have the international syndicate and you have these intelligence agencies carrying out their job, what has happened over time is that after World War II, when we set up a permanent intelligence function and military in the United States, the obviously the boogeyman, as I said earlier, was the Soviet Union. But after the 1991 Desert Storm, Iraq war, there was and it went into high gear after 9/11, there was a contracting out of both military and intelligence to like 20 times what it had ever been in the past. So all of this military industrial complex, which are all part of the international syndicate, they're now getting contracts from the military and the intelligence and profiting off of every single military engagement or CIA engagement around the world. So
The
if you
Contras
go
would be an example of this. The Contras, that would be an example of this.
oh, yes. Well, so go back to the very beginning with you have the East and West Indies, and the British had the East and West Indies, the Dutch had theirs. So in that model, these oligarchs, which basically was running these entities as private companies, they had to pay for their own military and intelligence, right? So they would send intelligence teams to like the Caribbean. Oh, look, they've got sugar. We need to take that island. And then their paramilitary guys would come down here and take over the island and enslave the people. So the only thing that we have done since that model is we've incorporated that model. And you have, the Rockefellers and all of the oligarchs, the Carnegies, the Whitneys, and all of those. Because they are the ones that had all of the ships that facilitated all of this stuff. They got their wealth from opium trafficking and all of this other stuff. So they just basically offloaded the expense of a military and intelligence capability onto us, the citizens. So now we have a standing military to do their work, and we have a standing intelligence agency to do their work. But now,
And we fund
after
it.
9/11, that we fund, not them, so they're making more profit off of us. We're their debt slaves. But after 9/11, when they started contracting out huge chunks of the military to keep the military entirety out of the eyes of the people paying for it. So our military isn't just the Department of War's budget. It's all of the contracting that goes with it. And now those are all contracted to private companies, which, if you watch over time from 2002 ish, 2003, when we went back into Iraq, they've exploded and they've consolidated. And so as they consolidated, they were bought up by private equity that these people own. So now not only are we paying for it through contracts, they're profiting off of it. So they turned an expense into a profit center. And that's kind of the big will. That's how I evolved. So when I first started this, I'm looking, okay, this is really bad. But about a year ago, when I realized, oh, because again, I have an MBA, so I've got a little bit of business sense, and I'm like, those son of a guns. They took an expense and turned it into a profit, and we're the ones paying for it. That was like my 180-degree shift. Every single thing that we have thought about our government and how the whole thing works, nothing works that way at all. So to your point, do I think the CIA works for Trump? Absolutely not. Do I think Radcliffe is trying to change that? Yes, I do. But you see Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, say this all the time. She said the Mockingbird program never went away. She does not trust any product. They just had to come out and change like 17 or 19 of them because everything in the intelligence estimate was based on politics and not actual intelligence. And I have ran across so many of them. Guatemala, the coup in 1954, the declassified State Department CIA cables from the lower analysts that were in the field in Guatemala is going, we looked under every rock. We can't find a communist anywhere. But the intelligence assessment that went to the president in order to justify the overthrow of the Guatemalan government said there's communists running around everywhere. And so that's kind of my bottom line to all of this is I began questioning, I don't even know what communism is because communism defined by the intelligence agency doesn't exist. So I don't know what was going on in the Soviet Union. I don't like it, and I'm not a communist sympathizer. I don't know what was going on over there.
Richard Poe tears it apart with his book, How the British Invented Communism, and blamed it on the Jews. So if you haven't read that book, Colonel, I do highly recommend it.
I have. There's some finer points that I would probably disagree with a little bit.
Yep.
But
I would agree with that sentence.
yeah. It definitely is necessary to understand the background of all of these operations that has brought us to today. Because in my way of thinking, the post-World War II boundaries and creations of things like Taiwan, which did not exist prior to World War II, and Israel, which didn't exist prior to World War II as a nation state. Yes, there was the concept after World War I. Again, we've already went over World War I and the necessary evilness of those wars to change the map. You go back to the theory of strategy of tension. If you don't have a boogeyman, a controlled boogeyman, you cannot justify being at war since World War II to today because you wouldn't have an enemy. So, under the strategy of tension, there were strategic entities set up after World War II that you can just flip a switch and say, I want a war in that area. That's Israel for the Middle East. The Near East is Pakistan, made up out of whole cloth, just took land from Afghanistan and India and plopped. And we made sure it was going to be really bad because we didn't just create Pakistan. We looped up around India, East Pakistan, which today we call Bangladesh. So we kind of sandwiched it in. And so now I've got borders galore that I can have fights at all the time. And then what happens? Oh, two new nuclear powers, Pakistan and India. Oh my gosh. And look, we've been in Pakistan forever with the ISI during the 80s, all of that stuff. And then Taiwan in the Far East, which was Formosa until we decided we wanted to put the Opium King, Chiang Kai shek, there. And then all of a sudden, we just changed the name and create a new country. Back to the point we were talking about. We can create countries anywhere we want as long as it's controlled and it's going to be used in our gamesmanship of controlling the world. And so every time they wanted to have any problems with Japan or with China, or you get a leader over there that isn't under your control, Taiwan flares up. Every time something's going on or something domestically that we don't want to focus on, something happens in Israel. And you just keep seeing this over and over and over again. And it's not unrelated.
Canada in and of itself, a lot of people don't understand. Its creation is literally based as a wedge to stop the American system of political economy from developing the relationship of friendship with what I consider to be a natural ally, which would be Russia. And so it's clear that Matthew and Cynthia's work, as well as like Anton Chenkin's work and others have clearly pointed out that we're probably single-handedly responsible for being the facilitator of at least 8 attempts on your presidents.
Well, and I was kind of shocked going through all of this research because Canada is considered this kind of almost neutral. That people don't think of it as part of the British Empire, although we all know it is. And there's a lot of companies that do very nefarious things that have branches or even their headquarters in Canada for purely not relevant to its operations reasons, right? So, like a lot of the mining companies that have interest in South America, for some reason, their headquarters are really in the United States, but on paper, their headquarters is in Canada. And I thought that very odd. But then again, you go back in history and you look at the arrangements through right after World War II, where we were bringing all the opium in. We brought opium in through Cuba and Canada, and we kind of sandwiched most of the New York opium, heroin was coming in through Canada with all of the mafia involved in that area, which I was again shocked. I had no idea there was so much mafia presence in Canada. There's a lot of
the Bronfmans. I mean,
yes,
the whole whiskey trade, all that infrastructure got built. They had no intentions of like having it go away.
No, it just turned into opium traffickers and marijuana traffickers and all of that stuff.
Fentanyl.
And yes. And so again, that was all news to me. That was stuff I did not know until I started this research project. And so, and of course, Canada has played a huge role in UN peacekeeping operations that had nothing to do with peacekeeping operations at all. And so it has gotten a PR campaign of being basically kind of a neutral, kind of like Switzerland. And when you dig into Switzerland, they're not neutral at all. They've never been neutral. And so you start to see patterns, and it starts to make you question literally everything your educational brainwashing taught you.
Well, now you alluding to some of the drugs. You know, our family just watched the movie Kill the Messenger, and it was based on some of the realities of exposing the CIA and all these intelligence and those think tanks that you alluded to, this international syndicate, to fund some of their operations using the drug money and using, because, you know, a lot of people might know of the IMF and all these banks printing money. Well, as they're inflating the dollar, doping, as they're inflating the dollar, they still need money to fund all of these operations and these black ops and things like National Endowment for Democracy, because we're so good-hearted and altruistic that we need to put democracy in these countries that we can monopolize all their resources. But how are we going to fund them if not, we need real money? And while they're simultaneously inflating the dollar, you still need actual money to fund these things. And so that the movie was around Gary Webb, who exposed the CIA for putting these intelligence agency agents into the mafia world. Now, but you alluded to, and you can speak more on that because it's definitely something that's prevalent in Canada. You alluded to the mafia, but fentanyl, as far as most Canadians think of it, that comes from China. China's the one bringing the drugs into Canada, is it not?
So my research does not say that. My research says that China provides chemicals for people to produce, and those are very different things, because you leave out the critical piece of where it's actually being produced. It's not being produced in China. China has chemicals, but let me go back in time since you mentioned Gary Webb. What we found out with his research is that, so just for historical purposes, we have the Golden Triangle, we have the Golden Crescent when it moves to Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey, all CIA operations, by the way. And then we have the Golden Triangle in Colombia, right, with Peru and Bolivia, which was the cocaine. So the next evolution of that is fentanyl. When we got to, when you go back and you look at the Golden Triangle, and you look at the Golden Crescent, there was some, so I call all narcotics chemical weapons. Until I started this research, I had no idea. I've read a lot about opium and cocaine and stuff like that. I had no idea how you made it. There's like, if you had an entire, like 100 pieces, one piece is natural, either the opium plant or the coca plant. The other 99 pieces of the final drug product is chemicals. And there's all kinds of processes, repeated processes, to make the paste into this other substance, and then that finally becomes a powder. And so this entire process takes a crap ton of chemicals. Well, do you know who the original chemical suppliers were? Dow Chemical, DuPont Chemical. And they knew, based on the quantities they were selling to these locations all over the world, exactly what that chemical was being used for, because no one needed that much chemical to make fertilizer or anything else. They knew it because it's a specific combination of chemicals. So they continued to do this up into the 80s when it was brought to Congress's attention, and they said, you're no longer, and that was by the time we've already went through 2 iterations and we're on our 3rd before they went, oh gosh, look at that all those chemical guys that are contributing to our political campaigns are actually producing the drugs, or supplying the chemicals to produce. Maybe they shouldn't be doing that. And so thanks to the law, they were forbidden to do that. But do you think that they're going to give up that profit? No. What they do is exactly what they did during World War II, when they have, like, Ford not only had Ford in the United States, they had Ford in France and Germany. And, Ford kept producing stuff even after France was occupied by Germany with the Nazis. And so you just set up derivatives of companies all over. And so, to be honest with you, I have not spent the time to track the ownerships of the chemical companies in China, but since everybody else is invested over there, um, it is logical that you're going to find ties to US chemical companies in China, since we find ties to every other company in China. That's point number one. I'm not saying that's true. I am saying that history would almost guarantee it being true. Number two, um, talking about patterns, number two, where is fentanyl being actually produced? Because most of these chemical things have to be international trade, right? It's going from China somewhere. China's not making China makes medical grade fentanyl for medical purposes because fentanyl is used in hospitals. It's a legitimate product.
So wouldn't the largest distributor of medical products right now, other than like people trying to foist that upon China, but that plane lands in India, does it not?
A lot of it lands in India.
Like the pharmaceutical companies are massive there.
Is huge in India.
So that
Yes.
sounds like a good cover for action.
Yes. Um, so, but there's a lot of fentanyl labs in Mexico. A
Ah.
lot. A lot.
Is that why Trump's poking around in there right now?
Yes. One of many reasons. But there's a lot of fentanyl labs in Mexico. But understand that the majority of those chemicals that come in to produce fentanyl are bought internationally with knowledge of the Mexican government because they're offloading that material at regular ports in Mexico. Now, of course, we've found fentanyl labs here too.
And Vancouver,
But again,
Vancouver has sent tons your way. Even Alberta's has is guilty of this too.
and Vancouver would be the perfect, right, port, the whole 9 yards on the West Coast, to get the chemicals, and so the chemicals are coming from China. Um, I don't know how you, regulate because they're chemicals that are used for other things, just not at that quantity. Um, so obviously, there's a multi-prong approach that is needed to address that, but all of that cannot be laid at China's doorstep.
Well, I have another question because you talked about, when with the creation of, Pakistan, for example, taking a little bit of Afghanistan, taking India, and then even because they sandwiched it, then you get Bangladesh. You seem even Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is recognized by most people as a part of China, and yet there are certain people in Taiwan that claim it is the two systems one country type thing. So they have their own, they consider themselves their own system, their own jurisdiction, even though they are part of China. Now, are there not, is it a broad stroke brush just to claim, oh, it's all of China? Or if Taiwan does something, because it is a proxy, as you've alluded to, and they created it, this international syndicate created it for its own purposes, is it appropriate of us to diagnose something that Taiwan does onto all of China? Or are there being these little proxy provinces and states and countries, is there entities within China that would be the cause of these things, or is it just broad stroke brush all of China? Because you separated the intelligence agencies from the U.S. government. So if we can separate the CIA from the U.S. government and not just broad stroke brush all of U.S., can that not be applied also to somebody like China?
Absolutely. And that's such a critical point, everything that you just said. So, what I, again, I'm just telling you my own, because I, I felt like I went to Air War College. I have a diploma over there. I spent a year there, and the whole purpose of that was to teach you the geopolitical military axis in every area. I traveled to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia during that year that I was there. So it's a very in depth 1 year program that senior officers go to. And so imagine my surprise when I didn't know that Taiwan was Formosa until World War II, and that when we decided to change the name and pretend like it was its own, um, I mean, we didn't even just pretend it was its own country. We said it was in charge of mainland China. We said it was in charge of mainland China right up until 1970s when we finally recognized mainland China. And did you know that they had a seat on the same National Security Council at the UN, but it wasn't mainland China. It was Taiwan that was
Oof.
sitting in the China seat that
Oof.
entire time. I
Oof.
didn't know that. So the entire first 40 years of Taiwan's existence, we called it China and we ignored mainland China. It didn't exist. It was just this communist hellhole that everybody carefully ignored. And in doing so, Chiang Kai shek, when he got to Taiwan, within moments declared martial law, killed any Formosan that rebelled against their country, their island, being ran by an opium warlord, because that's what he was. And there was mass chaos on the island of Formosa for several years. They lived under martial law for 40 years. They didn't have a democracy, but we were told it was a democracy worth fighting for, right? We were going to come to Taiwan's defense. We had a China lobby. We had all kinds of iterations. The entire time that was going on, the CIA was arming and equipping it with these covert weapon systems. Just look up William Polly and his background on creating the Curtis franchise in Southeast Asia and supplying he was the grandfather of the Flying Tigers, which turned into the Civil Air Transport, which turned into Air America. So he's
Isn't that the
intimately
Sully story?
yeah,
Barry?
yes. He's intimately involved in this whole creation over there of this opium empire, as was Paul Helliwell, former OSS/CIA guy, who, by the way, bought up the land for Disney down the road here. He's in all kinds of nefarious things. So I found all of these little Forrest Gump guys that show up in all of these Gladio things. So it is absolutely fair to say that China, to use people's favorite word, has a deep state. And Xi is not necessarily part of that deep state, which is why you keep seeing all of this internal decapitation of like the military piece of it and stuff. It is not, it is completely feasible that you have, because you have this one area, I forget what the name of it is, down in the southwest corner of China that's like an autonomous zone. They have casinos, they have their own military. So there are pieces of China that doesn't look like what you and I have been led to believe China functions as. Plus, during this entire time, the CIA brought Tibetans into the United States and trained them to be Gladio stay-behinds in Colorado Springs, and then put them back into Tibet to disrupt internal China activities. We did that with the Uyghurs too. We took Uyghurs out of China, trained them to be terrorists, and inserted them back into China to fight internally in China. So you have the entire southern border of China, whether it was the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Taiwan, Tibet, the Uyghurs. Nepal was a hotspot for the Millennium, the MCC, Millennium Challenge. So kind of the whole takeaway that I have from my formal education and my last 3 years worth of research is that if you do not go back and look at arrangements such as Chiang Kai-shek and the recognition of this tiny little island as China, as opposed to the entire China. To your question about how do you operate in the environment that they've artificially created? So again, back to the we just created a country out of whole cloth called Taiwan and recognized it as a country for 40 years until it was in the oligarch's best interest to then exploit mainland China, and everybody wanted to go there for resource, cheap labor, and all of that other stuff. Then we just throw Taiwan to the side and get in bed with China. And all of the industrial oligarchs goes over there, exploits the cheap labor. They get in bed. They don't care that it's communist. I
There's
mean,
just something to add to that for a reference sake for the audience. There's a documentary called The China Hustle. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Colonel, but it gives an understanding of how all of a sudden they're okay with China because they could exploit it.
Mm.
so and that kind of comes down to a fundamental question: is communism bad? We all think it's bad.
Hmm.
But why are the oligarchs over there in a communist country doing business? So is it bad or is it good if it benefits you? If there's slave labor under a communist system and you're exploiting that, because that's exactly what they're doing. If they want us to believe that China is a communist country, then why are you doing business in the communist country? There's if you actually start dissecting the things that they say and do, there is a huge divide between the two. You're telling me that the CIA and whoever they work for overthrew all of Latin America with the exception of Belize. It's literally the only country down there that didn't get overthrown. That was for a while, now I know why, but it's the only country that wasn't overthrown. And we did that all to make them not communist while these guys are in bed with the communists in China. Ha rectify those 2 things for me because you can't. And it is all about exploiting the resources, and they will do it under any guise. They don't care. They just have these books. Oh, this guy's going to be a communist. Oh, this guy's going to be this, and they use whatever justification necessary because they literally have no problem. As we said at the beginning of the show, they created communism, so they have no problem with communism.
I like how we're like getting into because how we could have started with this is like specifically targeting almost like the British Empire if we wanted to, but I like how we're getting more specific as in like what is the overall like I guess sort of behaviors that you need to look out for regardless of who it is, right? And like it's kind of like what Matthew talks about where it's like there's like always two states when it comes to it's like there's the deep state, right? And then there's something entirely different. And so I like how we're specifying really the ergonomics of what is deep state when we talk about it. And then I think the thing that like resonated with me when I was listening to again, you were on the Tommy podcast because you've been on really frequently as with Tom Luongo just recently, and you were saying that like you're looking at all of these tactics that you're talking about as like that's terrible and that's an awful thing, right? And then we're attributing it though to the wrong cause, like even China, for example. It's like it doesn't mean they don't have a deep state, right? That's what we're trying to say. It's like no, for sure you look out for the behaviors of what it is that's happening, but for the span of time, and like I want to get your opinion on this, is like historical evidence, right, suggests that more often than not, though, it's been the West. You've been mentioning CIA, but we even know through like our research as well, like you said, OSS, right? So, and then like the CIA, and it
Came out of
the OSS, and that would be like the UK, for example, and so, like there's been more of a history of just this sort of like transitional Anglo-American empire doing these type of tactics that you're talking about and infiltrating these countries, as you mentioned with like the Uyghurs, if I'm not mistaken, the sort of I guess Gladio type stay behind units and terrorist units. And so that to me, I'm like, that feels like something that needs to get touched on, because then we're attributing again the wrong causality to what it is that we claim that we hate.
Great point. if you go back, and that's kind of the highlight, I think, of Cynthia Chung's book, is it does go back to the Fabian Society and a global roundtable. And if you picture that top table of people, they envisioned a Pan America, a Pan Europe, a Pan Asia, that there was going to be seats at that table and everything else is downstream from that. They were going to run the world. That's their one world government, right? The one that didn't have a seat at the table was Africa because that was going to be their slave colony. And so it is very much in that focus. If you understand that hierarchy, then you need all of these other subsidiaries of that main table, whether it's the 300 committee, the CFR, the RIIA, the Bilderbergs. So you have all of these orbiting secondary tables that people sit at, and they're cross fertilized. So you may have a Rockefeller on this, and this one, and then you've got a Rothschild on this, and this one. But they just kind of cross fertilize each other at all of these different subsidiary tables. And then you have all of the slaves down here, which is all of us. Um, and you can see this playing out with the exploitation of all of this. But it's very important to these people to keep up the guise, and all it is kind of a cloak of democracy, because they do all of this under the guise of this famous word, democracy. That's where you get the National Endowment for Democracy, Democracy Now. All of it's done under a cloak of democracy, when in fact, they want anything but that.
And democracy from their vote, not ours.
Well, I mean, I was even listening, like one of our, we did an interview recently with someone named May Lillywhite, and it was like a small little comment on neocolonialism, because I was like basically painting a very minute version of what you're painting, because I have not dived into the research as extensively as you have, but just kind of making fun of the fact that we're like in this neo-colonialist feudalistic system. And then she was like, well, at least like the old colonialism like provided trains and stuff like that, and rails and hospitals, and I'm like sitting here thinking to myself, I'm like, they give you both the problem and the solution, right? And so like those hospitals, I'm like, why did they even need to be there in the first place?
Well,
Like,
they provide, I thought of it, okay, they provide, just like in Canada, they gave us the Canadian Pacific Railway. Well, why did they do that? They did that to keep British Columbia from joining the US, because BC was unhappy with the way Canada was going because it wasn't very democratic. And to prevent them from going to somewhere a bit more prosperous, they gave us the Canadian Railway to keep us appeased. And that's something that Albertans are facing even now with, because there's this petition for independence that's going about, and if it goes through, then we get a referendum. And if we get a referendum, we have to go into negotiations with the federal government. And they want the referendum to get a better deal, to get our better Canadian Pacific Railway. Maybe they'll give us a couple pipelines.
Yeah, they'll placate us is what they'll do.
Well, that's the thing. So if you look at historically Gladio, it's like, so even colonialism, great, they gave you these railways and they gave you these hospitals, but they gave you the hospitals to put their doctors in there, to get their inoculations in there, to get their chemical drugs in there,
Pharmaceuticals,
and their
yeah.
pharmaceuticals, and they didn't do it so then we, or the countries that they put the hospitals in, so they could manage their resources.
Yeah,
they put in the infrastructure so they could continue managing this developing country's resources. So it wasn't out of a benevolence, it was out of a long-term monopolization of these other countries. And same thing for us, we have to keep an eye on whatever promises they think that we're going to get. That doesn't guarantee we have control or we have the regulation. It doesn't mean that's in our hands. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind, looking at all these countries and all of these fake pleasantries that these other countries have been given. We could be getting the same thing, and they could be offering us these same, hidden hand gifts. And we have to keep all this whole interview in the back of our minds, that way we don't fall for whatever facade they want to give us of a better deal. Because really, the only better deal that we can get, we have to give ourselves. Because as you said, it is not one of the biggest takeaways I'm having from this conversation with you, Colonel, is the fact that you can't look at just countries. You can't call the US an enemy. You can't call Canada the enemy. You can't call China the enemy, because all of these countries are made up of these military groups that you said, these political groups, all of these deep states, all of these. So whenever you regard a country, you can't just regard the country. You have to look at all of the entities. And as you alluded to, the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, these think tanks and these roundtables that have been, and the intelligence agencies putting their tentacles into every country. And so irregardless, because they make the borders, so you can't look at the borders that they have given you because they gave the borders to you. And so anytime we look at a country now, you are still looking at this country via the glasses that they have given you. And so now the gift that you have given, hopefully the audience and to me and my family, is the gift of Gladio glasses. So we can use borders and frames that they didn't give us, because you don't want to fight a battle using their tools. We need to use our tools.
Correct.
And this is a tool that people don't know that we have in our box.
Correct. And let me just address, I found this a fascinating conversation about, I don't like to use the word neo on anything. There's the whole Ukrainian thing about Nazis versus neo-Nazis. No, they're just all Nazis.
True.
There's no such thing as a neo-Nazi.
True.
You're either a Nazi
It's
or
still
you're
a
not
continuation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at colonialism, I view that the same way. Colonialism, to your point about they gave them, I mean, just think about that terminology. They gave them railroads. Okay. Who built those railroads? JP Morgan, Carnegie, no one gave them railroads. Okay. When the Bolshevik Revolution occurred in Russia, GE electrified all of communist Soviet Union, right? So no one gave them power. Those guys made a crap ton of money using the Tsar's gold to pay themselves. The Trans-Siberian Railroad, well, what was that used for? That was a great railroad, right? Well, our railroad barons all got rich doing that. No one gave the people of Russia railroads. They used them to take them to prison camps. They used them to exterminate them. No one gave them railroads. Same thing with hospitals. To your point about using them to kill people, because that's kind of
See anything like that going on with certain
not at
products?
all. But my favorite story of the whole medical community was when I did, for a completely different thing, I was working on a project to get fluoride out of our water here in Florida. And I did the research into fluoride and found out that, like all of the aluminum oligarchs like Kaiser, had all of these aluminum processing facilities that generated basically the byproduct of hazardous waste called fluoride. And then they decided to put it in everybody's water. So they were not having to pay to get rid of the fluoride. Again, you took an expense and turned it into a profit center, because I convinced everybody to start buying it and putting it in toothpaste and water. So they did the exact same thing that I just described to you that they're famous for doing, is they took an expense and put it into a profit margin. And then what did Kaiser do? He went out and built the largest medical facility infrastructure in the United States called Kaiser Permanente. He built the hospitals because he knew he was poisoning everybody.
Nice.
So
Oh my gosh. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't give us anything. And then they took money out of my paycheck to put into Medicare, then to, pay themselves for poisoning me. Everything's a profit center for them. Literally everything. And so if you look at colonialism, and just use the Congo because it's one of the best examples, the king, not Belgium, the king owned the Congo. And then he gives it to the country, like, you can just give property of people in a country that is in Africa to the country of Belgium. And Belgium, has it as a colony. And then when you go to 1960, 61, when they killed Patrice Lumumba, the school system had produced about 5% literacy in an entire country. The hospitals were almost non-existent. And the same is true with the only infrastructure, whether it was rail or road or whatever, went to the plantations. They didn't do any of that for the people. They did that to get their products out. They built ports and owned the ports to get their products out, whether it be people in the case of Africa or the actual raw material. They didn't give the people anything. And this was true afterwards, because as soon as they overthrew Patrice Lumumba and put their stooge Mobutu in there, the same thing perpetuated. It was still colonialism under the cloak of democracy. They didn't give them hospitals. As a matter of fact, you can see what happens when that actually happens, because it's very observable in Venezuela. So in Venezuela, you had the corrupt oligarch in bed with the CIA in the 70s, 80s, up until the 90s. And then in 1998, Chavez wins election. When he won election, their literacy rate was less than 20%. It's like 80 to 85% right now. And he did that by nationalizing. I mean, he didn't even nationalize it. It had already been nationalized, but he restructured the deal of their nationalized oil to go back to the people. And
Oh, he's
built
got to die.
schools.
He's got to die. You do stuff like that,
We're
you
gonna
got to die.
overthrow him. We're going to try to overthrow him repeatedly. He did exactly what they try to say that the neo-colonialism did, but he did it. It wasn't anyone else. And as soon as he started doing that and educating the people, building hospitals, building the infrastructure, roads and stuff like that, the very first thing they do is try to coup him.
Yeah,
So
I was saying
you
that,
can't
Maddie,
just sit there.
dependency. If you try and the minute that dependency gets out of the equation and people can actually just self-sovereignly
Yes.
figure out how to do their own shit, it's like the oligarchs kind of threw on that one. They're like, shit, like now I don't have a bunch of slave class that don't know how to read, don't know how to make things, and I can't profit off of any of that.
Yes. And you go to Burkina Faso and you're seeing the exact same thing. They've already tried to overthrow him like 3 times. The French has. So anybody that actually tries to do that, it's almost a certain death warrant for them, if not just an invitation out of the country, as the case with like Guatemala. But anybody that tries to use their own natural resources. And what I find most fascinating about that is the capitalist, us, the people that are all about making money. And we're anti-communist, right?
Free market.
Well, if there's some happy medium there where you can create a sovereign wealth fund, which is basically what the oil was for Venezuela, and you can use that money not to not have capitalist businesses or democracy in free and fair trade within your country and with other countries, but have this level of what most people would refer to as socialism underpinnings of providing the education system, of providing the basic medical care using your own natural resources. There's almost an argument to be made that they don't want that hybrid model. And no one is ever going to be allowed to see it because we decapitate the people trying to implement it. And what's really weird, again, looking at what happens, not what they say is happening. Describe to me the difference between what they didn't want to have happen in Venezuela and what is happening in the United States, and even more so in Canada, where your school is free, your medical care through Medicaid, Medicare, all of those different things, basic levels of medical care is free. Don't you actually have a hybrid socialist model right now?
Yeah, and I mean, there's that old saying: if it's free, you're the product.
Yes. So the very thing that we're brainwashed to see our system as a capitalist democracy, but every time anybody else wants to have something that we have, it's labeled communism. So I'm sorry, but isn't our education free here? I mean, we pay for it with our tax dollars, but wouldn't I rather them be getting oil out of the ground and not using my tax dollars for that? How is that part communism? Oh, because you're not taking my money. So to me, the system we have here is more communistic than what Venezuela had because you're stealing my money.
Mm.
The
And
system's
so,
working exactly as intended.
yes. And so when you start asking fundamental questions like that, then you're the heretic. You're the person that's, the crazy person. But you look at what the deal that Alaska made with its citizens when the Alaskan oil, it's not US oil, it's Alaska oil. Um, they pay a dividend check to all of the residents every year based on the oil revenue. And they pay their bills based on the oil revenue. Well, then how is that not something that can be construed across all? And why is Alaska's oil Alaskans and not the United States? When you're going to take oil out of another state, is that state going to be able to own its own resources and do the same thing? Like if you find a gold mine or a copper mine or something like that? Or is it not part of the sovereign wealth unless the US government goes in and nationalizes that land? There's just so many economic things that make literally no sense when you start talking about them, to your point. About what's actually going on and not what we're being fed as far as a narrative.
Dad or Macy, you guys have any last questions or thoughts for her before I get her final remarks? And then I will, promote her work and where people can find her, because clearly people need to learn more of her work.
Yeah, I'm hoping that with your permission and you're willing to accept our humble invitations, we're going to still try to ping you from time to time so that we can keep trying to
Oh,
educate our
absolutely.
citizens. But I just also want to say, like, we really do appreciate you and appreciate what you're doing and what you're offering, because our hearts, as we said earlier, we really do want to see Alberta succeed, and we need each other. We need the people here. But as Patrick Henry had made reference to in his 1775 address to the in Virginia, there was going to be help that's going to come. Like it wasn't just like, if God be for us, who stands against us? He was also prompting that there's going to be others that will take up our cause because they believe in what we're doing. And there's evidence to that because the American system of political economy was being seen, being replicated in Germany. It was being
Japan,
seen in Japan.
Russia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So there was allyship, and very few people know that even during the Civil War, allyship from Russia to help keep the hand of the British and the hand of the French. And believe me, like, we were no ally in that cause. Like, Canada was not your friend, and in many cases we have to honestly admit the people are, but our system is not. It's not friendly to you. So that's all I just really wanted to offer, is that I'm hoping that we're starting a journey that's going to help our citizenry bring their game up. Because the one thing that I wrote down a few notes when you're talking about the parapolitical, and how they keep it framed. There's this quote from Noam Chomsky: "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even
Yes.
encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate." So I see that as one of the fundamentals that is interwoven into when you talk about the parapolitical. And then I was considering the parafinancial. And when we look into history, we see both sides of that argument being controlled by our good friends in the city of London and among other places, the syndicate, because you were given the Austrian School of Economics and the London School of Economics. And if you were a Republican, you thought one way about economy. And if you're a Democrat, you thought the other way about economy. So once again, that falls into under the parapolitical. They're keeping you within a frame. You couldn't
Yes.
take a look at, say, the American system of political economy, which I would argue right now, China and Russia seem to be doing a much better job of demonstrating that type of economic. Even the LaRouche Foundation talks about Lyndon LaRouche and like, so you want to be an economist. I think another book is the Science of Christian Economy. So there's another area, and then you bring up the paramilitary, and the part that came to me while you were speaking and giving like, so we had a deep state that got built in Russia get extricated because obviously there was some things that were being found out. So they set up shop in New York. So they came back so that they could rally to the cause to then get sent back in so that they could go and stir shit up in Russia. So then I found myself going, well, this is intriguing because several circumstances in the early 2020s, like 2021, we had individuals that were being trained on Vancouver Island that were wearing the People's Liberation uniforms of Chinese soldiers. But in all actuality, when you did a little bit of digging, you found out that we were training paramilitary groups from Taiwan to be able to like we're training them in Canada and then shipping them out to Taiwan so that they can go stir shit in China. So I'm kind of finding myself going, so is it possible then that we could have like when if you look another reference to put for the show, there is a show called Book of Trump, episode 15 on Badlands, where there is a breakdown between Gordon McCormick and Matthew Arrett on the life of Xi Jinping. And it would appear to me that during the purge, the beginnings of the purge of the deep state, when Xi came into power in 2012, all of a sudden Vancouver got flooded. We had 3 major influxes into our country of the deep state that Xi purged in order to try to do his best to clean up things in Hong Kong and Shanghai. And it looks like they're blaming China for this influx and problem that's happening in Canada, turning the minds of all my fellow citizens into China bad enemies. But it's our deep state that's here doing this thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was what I wanted to say.
So that's one of the amazing benefits to the system in this brainwashing, right? So they've been able to, everything bad is blamed on mainland China. Everything good is Taiwan. And so when you're talking, when it's all the same entity. So people really need to dive into the background of Taiwan. I mean, it was set up as an opium hub. That's literally the beginnings of it. And the KMT army, if you go back and, I mean, it's just mind blowing to me. One of the things
I've been digging, Colonel. I've been digging.
I know you have. I'm very impressed. One of the things that was the most dumbfounding to me was I came across the School of Americas. Now, I had heard about that being in the military, and I knew it was a nefarious thing, but I didn't really actually look into it. But basically, it was in Panama, and it was training all of the Operation Condor, which is kind of the kissing cousin of Gladio in Latin America. And it was training all of the national police and the new intelligence people and the National Guard people that were going to suppress the resistance to the military dictators that the CIA was installing in all these countries, right? So we're going to produce all of these people. And oh, by the way, all of the military dictators were graduates of the School of Americas. That's why I laughed when Maduro said, I can't possibly be a dictator because I didn't graduate from the School of Americas. That just tickled me to death.
He just said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. So if you look at that, I was like, okay, well, that's weird. Are there any more of these? Well, I stumbled across one. I stumbled across what is referred to as the Taiwan Political Warfare cadre academy. Now let's dissect that. Taiwan, political warfare, cadre academy. What they were doing, well, among other things, it's kind of like if the School of Americas was elementary school, this is the junior high. Okay, so graduates from School of Americas that was going to go on to be infiltrated into political parties and political infrastructure to be in charge had to go to the Taiwan political warfare. Well, it's not like political science, right? We're not sending them to a university to learn how to be a politician. No, it's political warfare for a reason. Because what they taught there was how to rebrand death squads like in El Salvador into political parties. So they took entire things like, and they were the experts, because remember, Chiang Kai-shek had his KMT army. Go look up what the political party is in Taiwan today. It's called the KMT. They took an army, rebranded it as a political party while it was still functioning as a paramilitary army, and just simply said, oh, today it's a political party. And they teach the tactic of taking basically gladio style entities, terrorist. What just happened in Syria?
Yeah, I was good. I was just about to go there. Like, isn't the Taliban and Muslim Brotherhood and all like?
Yes. This is a tactic that originated from this Taiwanese school. And that Taiwanese school originally was all funded by the CIA and set up by the CIA. So this all has very relevant meaning to the situation that we find ourselves in today. Because in the United States, the Democrats are just blatantly putting CIA people as the governor of Virginia, as senators, as, and it's not that the Republicans haven't had our share as well, but you find these people embedding themselves in taking over entire political movements around the world, and they're nothing but terrorists. And that has a precedence if you know your history.
Okay, so I hope everybody brought notebooks.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna have to re-listen to this.
No, this is a very good exercise for people. If you're in Alberta, if you're in Canada, whatever enemy you think is outside of your country, it's clearly not outside of your country. We have an internal enemy. Our intelligence agencies also, like Dad alluded to earlier, just what Colonel Towner was talking about, taking these paramilitary entities and then transferring them into political, our RCMP getting transferred over into CSIS, and then even some of the claims about the infiltration that China has done into Canada, that information, when you follow the thread, it comes from CSIS. So they give you the enemies just like they gave us the hospitals in Africa out of the altruistic nature of their heart. You have to look at the sources of where's the information coming from. Absolutely. And in every country, there is clearly a deep state, because all of these think tanks, again, there's no real country borders other than the ones that they gave you. And so therefore, when you're looking at China, well, which China is it? When you're looking at Canada, which Canada is it? Which entity is operating via this policy, this province, this NGO? You have to look into those, follow the money, follow the entities. And so hopefully Albertans can take this overall concept and hone it in their minds for, even though we've been on the ground, our family, and we know a lot of this Alberta independence movement really is grassroots, it doesn't have to stay that way if we don't keep our gladio glasses on. There can be somebody that comes in and infiltrates. There could be somebody that we get the independence, and then just like in the American system, they got their independence, but then they had the Civil War because they don't give up resources. They don't
Correct.
give up their monopolies. And that's the funny thing about infrastructure, what Colonel Towner said. They create these roads, they create the railways. So even if you get your independence, you're still utilizing their tools. They have they have the leases, they have the collateral. And so we have to find a way to learn this, keep this on our radar. So when we think we have access to these things, we really have another 10 years of work to actually put it back into the jurisdiction of Albertans. This is good. This is a long,
like
long
who gave
journey.
us those
Yeah,
resources?
they're going to try to rug pull us for sure. And if we don't have everybody's head on a swivel, like we're just going to find ourselves in the same circumstance. They're better at this than we are. So we have to acknowledge where we have our deficiencies. If we're not looking honestly, it's the Cratylus dialogue where Socrates says there's no deception greater than self-deception because the deceiver is always home.
Yes.
That's you.
That's
That's
us.
every listener. That's myself. Like,
that is, again, why we always emphasize the brain, because the brain, as we said in our Sean Newman podcast, it is the micro version. If the enemy on the global scale is always within your own country because it's within our own agencies and think tanks, well, the enemy that causes all those think tanks, creates them, and comes up with all the malevolent ideas is also here. So it's the micro to the macro. So Colonel Towner, I want people to be able to find you.
yes.
Because you are a wealth of knowledge, clearly, and we could have talked for another 2 hours, but, you know, being respectful of your time, and if you will oblige us and join us again in the future, we don't have to force it all in one combo.
Absolutely.
So she has a Rumble channel, the Colonel's Corner. So people can go here, as you can see, Gladio, Operation Gladio is definitely her specialty. She does the book readings, as we alluded to earlier. There's also things, if people are interested in the World Wildlife Foundation and some of the NGOs that also help fund this monster. It's not just drugs behind the screen. There's also charity donations and NGOs they can also use to fund these things. So she goes into that very, very in depth. People can find her on X, where she likes to pick fights because she's smart.
What are you doing? I'm going to pick a fight.
And then there's also the Substack, which people can go and get further information. So pick your poison. There's 3 places you can find her. We will also have her back on.
Yeah, I keep reiterating, just as like my closing remark, that when we're talking about all of these entities and the ideas specifically that they come up with, as Maddie was alluding to, the brain, it's like that the oligarchs having their sort of think tanks and their round tables. And because in order for any of this to happen, we do have to kind of understand that it takes some organization, right? And how, if you guys refer to Colonel Tanner on the Tommy podcast or any sort of podcast where she starts talking about the Egmont group, and even like you need entities as well to try sort of track even the money laundering and such. It's funny because it's like they still do need to organize and get their thoughts and their initiatives out there, and it's hard to find, obviously, but it is out there. And then like that is what's been happening, is this sort of circulation of like entities and groups coming up with these sort of theories of humanity and how they see the world and how they see human beings, if you're really getting into like the morals of it and such. And then it transpires into their overall, I guess, operations. And that's the same thing that we have to figure out how to do for ourselves, is like us, even Benjamin Franklin having the Juno Club, right? It's like then you get all of these great individuals in these minds stirring and festering all of these ideas on how to counter this, right? And then that can transpire into our own think tanks, into our own roundtables. And now we're really getting the discussion going to try and conquer all of their operations with our own sort of operations. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Conspiracies are true. So whether or not they turn out for good or for bad, history will decide. I know we want to do conspiracies for good.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much, Colonel, for joining us.
Thank you, Colonel.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Without further ado, everybody, this has been another episode of At Home with Holmes. Toodaloo!
Bye.